So last week, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution recognizing transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against the history of mankind. That resolution, sponsored by Ghana, also called for the payment of reparations. Today on Africanews Debates, we ask the global reparations debate, who owes Africa? Welcome once again to Africanews Debates. My name is Ronald Kato. So during the vote on that resolution, three countries voted no. They are the United States, Israel, and Argentina. Europe voted as a bloc, or they didn't exactly vote, but they stayed away from the vote. It didn't have anything to do with the resolution. They said they have things that they disagree with. Now, to get us underway, here is this story that was covered by our newsroom about the resolution.
The United Nations General Assemblies voted to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. Tabled by Ghana, it also calls for reparations.
This resolution sends a very clear message that the international community would no longer tolerate impunity, that the international community stands for justice, that the international community and our multilateral system we have erected, no matter how long it takes, the day of reckoning will come. And so all of us as leaders should be mindful of our actions and our policies, that once we violate the rights of others, once we engage in impunity, in acts of injustice, the day of reckoning will come. To me, that is a very, very profound message that the UN is sending to the world today.
123 nations voted in favor of the resolution, 52 abstained, including Britain and the EU, while the US, Israel and Argentina voted against it.
Thank you again. So the stage is set. Time now for me to introduce our panelists on this episode of the Africanews Debates. I have Nkechi Taifa, a leading reparations advocate and attorney who has been at the forefront of the global movement for justice and was recently in New York for the UN discussions on reparations. Nkechi, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
And I have Jendayi Serwah, is the founder, African Connections and Reparations activist. And Ailana Jendayi, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
And Oliver Barker Vomawo is a legal practitioner who was part of the team that helped shape the reparations proposal presented at the United Nations. Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you again. And we are broadcasting live on our social media pages and over our YouTube. Head there to catch the show and make your opinions known. The question is the global reparations debate, who owes Africa? Let me start with you, Oliver. You were part of the team that drafted this proposal by Ghana. Tell us about the experience. What went on behind the scenes as you were doing this?
Thank you. I mean, I think that this, in many respects, everybody who was involved in this project understood the historical significance of what was before us. It meant that we had to be quite intentional in terms of the research that is presented. We had to be guided to ensure that this is a conversation that is holistic in its approach, that builds on previous work as to what has happened, not only within the General Assembly, but also within the African continent. We referred to some of the things that happened in Durban, in South Africa, but also in Accra with the Accra Declaration. But even most importantly, we needed to acknowledge the work that the Caribbean community, CARICOM, which has the Caribbean Reparations Commission, that has done significant work in elaborating what they call the 10-point agenda in pushing the conversation forward. So this is truly an initiative that stands on the shoulders of previous giants. But also in the effort of being inclusive, We're very mindful to bring on experts from different aspects that have been working on these questions for a long time. And also partners within the US Congressional Caucus, Reverend Al Sharpton, Ben Crump, so many other people that were brought onto the process. But what is significant, I would say, about this is that this was designed as a progressive instrument to push the international community forward, particularly the General Assembly, in two main ways. One, there has never been a recognition of the transatlantic slave trade and racialized chattel trade of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. And that's a significant point that international law moves forward in a particular regard. Secondly, one of the ways in which so many countries within the global north, Europe and others in particular, is this pushback, this idea and suggestion that slavery was always legal. Now, it was important to be able to bust that myth that there was never been a point, particularly during the transatlantic slave trade, where the slave trade was legal. It wasn't, in fact. If it was, why did we not see the sale of white individuals? What they had recognized was that slavery itself, as it exists within continental Europe, was not legal. What it meant was that they redefined the meaning of what is human. And so that the Africans were then not deemed human enough to partake in what the legal understanding of what is inhuman or immoral at the time. And so this was an attempt then to rediscover the humanity of the African and said that we were always human, whether or not you chose to recognize this at a period of time or not. And so in many ways, this pushes international law forward, it pushes international consensus in a new way that can open up new vistas for how we conceptualize a responsibility for crimes of the past, but also the gravity and weight to acknowledge the ways in which the transatlantic slave trade shaped global affairs more generally, I would say.
Jendayi, the fact that this resolution came in 2026, why did it take so long? Jendayi, are you there? I want to make sure we still have the connection to you.
Yes, I slipped for a bit. Can you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, the fact that this resolution passed in 2026, one would say that's too late. Why could have come sooner, could have come earlier?
I think if we can take another question, another answer, then I will try and get a better connection for you, because I'm currently experiencing a lot of difficulties.
Sorry about that. Nkechi, how significant is this? Because one could argue that this is simply countries trying to do virtue signaling. Does this resolution carry any weight beyond simply passing at the UN General Assembly?
It is absolutely phenomenal, the resolution. And it is a resolution that should have happened centuries ago. I mean, I would say 25 years ago was the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, which also said that the transatlantic trafficking in Africans was a crime against humanity. The United States walked out of that. So now we have 25 years later on the floor of the General Assembly an overwhelming vote of 123 nations in support. The Global South stood firm. 52 abstentions and 3 no votes. I mean, that is major. And I think what it does is signal what I'm calling a new international law regime, I guess you could say, wherein it's no longer just a matter of course that all of the nations are going to follow behind the United States. Okay, I think it was very telling that there were only 3. Unsurprisingly, Israel, Argentina, in the United States. So it was, in fact, a momentous occasion. The declaration itself was very accurate. and very, very bold. And I will say that even myself, okay, knowing how the world is and works, myself who grew up as a Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist, in the United States, wondered whether a resolution so bold would make it such that it would not pass. And I was 100% wrong. So all of my kudos go to Ghana, go to His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama and the drafters of the resolution in terms of staying firm. All my kudos go to them in terms of seeking to get allegiance amongst countries of the African Union, CARICOM, the Caribbean nations, Latin America, South America, and the like. And that is what really resulted in this very correct and overwhelming yes verdict.
Jendayi, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I can. Greetings. Yes.
So, Jendayi, the EU decided as a bloc to abstain from this vote. I mean, on the surface, the resolution looks innocent, and I want to believe it is. I mean, who wouldn't want to condemn transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity? So why do you think the European countries chose to abstain? What's so controversial about a resolution like this?
So before I come to that, I want to give credit and praise to my ancestors whose shoulders I stand on. And in terms of this whole movement, I do not necessarily give credit to any government or any bloc of governments, including CARICOM, for where we are today, because those from the grassroots have been campaigning the first act of resistance on the continent of Africa before we even came into the dungeons and onto the ships. That is the beginning of our repair process. We must define, when we talk about reparations, we must remember we're talking about repair beyond compensation. We must humanize our experience also, because I sit here with a level of discomfort at the use of the term slave trade, which is very dehumanizing and very sanitizing of an experience that is actually genocide of our people. So we must understand what reparations is, the nature of the harm, and what is in repair, what is in need of repair. And so all of the governments now, including the Ghanaian one and all the CARICOM ones, are standing on the shoulders of the Rastafari movement and the grassroots campaigners who made it possible for them to now be talking about this and taking up mainstream space on this issue. Now, as perpetrators, it is not surprising that you are going to abstain or even vote against the crime of genocide and recognizing that. It's quite clear that the West has been built on the backs of Africans, whether that be North America, whether that be the Caribbean, whether that be Britain. So it's not surprising when people show you who they are, you need to believe them the first time. Okay, so it's not surprising that they would abstain and find some reason about it being not the gravest, or it was legal at the time. Who said kidnapping? Who said rape and torture and trafficking were legal, and murder were legal at the time? I don't ever remember that in history and reading that anywhere that was legal. So let's not get into the objections, and just understand that people are not yet ready to be held accountable, and that is why they have abstained, because with recognition comes responsibility and accountability. So we should not be surprised, and they continue. We talk about the
There were voices before you finish, Jendayi. There were voices arguing that they were the same, especially the United Kingdom. They were the same countries that effectively ended or stopped slave trade. That this resolution doesn't give them any credit, and they wanted that to be made clear.
To the white enslavers as opposed to the victims.
We, as African people, made it impossible for them to continue. Our acts of resistance, the change in economy, we made it impossible for them to continue. They have no moral kudos out of that particular passing of acts in 1807 and 1833. They had to come to that time. Just like other people are going to have to come to this time right now that the war they are fighting is not sustainable and they have to find a way of ending it. Okay, so I do not accept that they had some kind of higher moral epiphany that led them to suddenly recognize us as human beings, particularly as we recognize that the disparities, inequalities, the continued neocolonialism, the lasting psychological impact here in Africa, as well as the UK, as well as the Americas, on our people continues. And they continue to rape and pillage our land under different guises right now. So we cannot give them credit for anything. They had to.
I think that the point that you're making, Jendayi, has to be emphasized because history has suggested that countries like Britain at some point developed a moral backbone and
nonsense.
Began to think, oh, okay, slavery is bad, but not a lot of credit is given to the fact that slaves themselves began organizing and made slavery difficult for their masters.
Please do not call our people slaves. We are African people who were enslaved. It is a condition, not an identity. I'm a descendant of an African, not a slave. Okay? And this is that sanitization of that language and the dehumanization that we are complicit in when we talk about ourselves as slaves and we use that term slave trade. Please, we need to define our own reality.
Thank you, Jendayi. Continue, Nkechi.
No, I was just saying, I agree with every single thing my sister Jendayi has said. I mean, I was just snap, 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 snap. Something else that she said that I'm going to really speaking to Oliver here, because I know you were part of the drafters. Sister Jendayi spoke about the issue of genocide. I looked in vain in the resolution for the word genocide, and I'm not quite sure why it was not there. And despite all of the great, phenomenal things that were there, and I say that because genocide is already a crime under international law, the International Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which the country in which I live in, the United States, did in fact ratify. And many people don't realize that the definition of genocide, the internationally accepted definition, is not just the killing of a whole group, but it's also the killing of members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction in whole or in part, taking measures to prevent births within the group, and transferring children from one group to another. So to me, that definition that's already enshrined within international law, I feel should have been part of the resolution itself. But the other thing I wanted to state is that you talked about hierarchy. That was one of the objections that was made by the United States, by the EU, by UK or whatever. I mean, how dare they talk about hierarchy? It was them that enshrined racial hierarchies that resulted in the United States in Jim Crow apartheid system, South Africa apartheid, all over the world, a hierarchy in terms of race. So how dare they come after all of this evidence and say they're not going to vote for it because of so-called hierarchy? What the resolution basically said it's not about hierarchy. It is about historical accuracy, okay? And the language, and again, hats off to you, Oliver, because that language was very, very precise, world-defining and world-breaking. That's what it, not just one single incident that had no repercussions anywhere else, but this had repercussions everywhere. So anyway, I just wanted to add those.
Thank you, Nkechi. I'd like to come to you, Oliver, if I can. Jendayi earlier spoke passionately about reparations. I would like you to take us inside the proposal, inside the resolution, especially the part about reparations, how they work, who pays what, and where does the payment go?
Thank you again for this. I think that one of our guiding lights in this conversation was a direction from the president of Ghana that we must be careful that we do not commercialize the enterprise and what we are engaged in. Reparations, as far as we understand it and understood it, was about repair. And that reparation process, we as African societies must repair. We must seek forgiveness from our ancestors and our colleagues who were trafficked abroad. And we must do that. That journey must start from the house or from our own internal systems to begin with. But most importantly, in the vein of not continuing the commercialization of the African body, that the focus in the conversation extends way beyond any questions of monetary compensation. In fact, one of the key things that the resolution talks about is the prompt and unhindered return of cultural artifacts that were stolen from the continent and that sit in Western museums till this day, and which they refuse to return back to the continent. And in so many communities, they went in, they murdered fetish priests or spiritual leaders of this and guides of these communities, and ransacked palaces and took all of this away into Europe. That the resolution makes no compromises about the need for a framework that returns these. Then, in connection with the full framework of what repair looks like, the resolution talks and calls for further dialogue regarding the parameters of what a reparatory justice systems would look like. It called on the African Union, it called on CARICOM, it called on Latin American groups to be involved in the process of defining the reparative justice framework. It gives some examples regarding apology, regarding this restitution that I've talked about, regarding the need for further studies and scholarship in order to be able to enhance significant comprehension and understanding of what transpired. And so the framework is larger. At no point in the resolution was there any engagement with how much must be paid to whoever, who needs to be paid. None of that conversation is within the context of this. What it is inviting us to do was to sit down as African people and people of African descent to design that reparative justice framework. And that's the work that needs to be carried forward now. And this is only the beginning of the kind of work that has been done. Now, the question
I'd like to read. Yeah, go ahead, Oliver.
I was just going to briefly say about the question of whether or not we're going to say the gravest crime against humanity or include concepts of genocide. There was something I think fantastically captured it on the floor of the General Assembly while we were there, which was the representative of Russia, which said essentially that Western countries were getting off cheap because the first genocide that happened in Africa, and we haven't even gone into that conversations yet. And so now we're just on the concept of crimes against humanity. There's a lot more work that needs to be done to be developed. Some of the things that happened to the Herero in Namibia, none of that conversation has yet been recognized. And very so often, African pain has not been given the kind of prominence that the international community needs to listen to. So I think that we are opening the door to even more engaged work in this area, and also to give a nod to some of the mobilizing that have been done in the grassroots that allows us to be able to get to the stage where we are today.
Thank you, Oliver. I would like to read a comment from one of our viewers here, Alex. He wrote that there is no amount of reparations that can make it right. Retribution, he says, is needed. What do you say to that, Nkechi?
Well, I mean, I agree that no amount of compensation or any other type of reparatory justice can fully compensate for what we have been through as a people. That's why I take a little offense to the concept in the international community of full reparations. I call it comprehensive reparations because nothing can fully 100% compensate for what what has been done to us. But reparations is a well-established principle. It's not something that we just pulled out of the sky. I mean, we know all of the examples that have gone on around the world in terms of Jewish people in Germany paying reparations, and the list goes on and on. But when it comes to us, there's always this hesitation. There's always these barriers that are put in. Oh, well, it was so long ago. Oh, It was legal at the time. Oh, you don't want a hierarchy behind crimes. That is hogwash. And I think that this resolution showed and revealed this. But what I really want to say is that both Oliver and Sister Jendayi brought up the fact of grassroots. Okay, this did not emanate from government. Okay, I mean, even in the country that I live in, Queen Mother Audley Moore, okay, what we call the mother of the modern era reparations movement in the United States, back in the 50s, appealed to the United Nations with respect to reparations. Malcolm X went to the United Nations. The Honorable Marcus Garvey was always talking about this. Bob Marley, in his songs and in his lyrics, this was grassroots. And despite the vote of the government in which I live under, which does not speak for me or many others in the United States, I am really proud to let the global community know that despite the United States no vote, that there is a rapidly growing reparations infrastructure in the United States composed of grassroots organizers, descendant-led initiatives, scholars, lawyers, artists, faith leaders, policymakers, state and local task forces, all engaged in a whole wide range of strategies, from public education and narrative change to policy advocacy to litigation to cultural work and mass mobilization. And it's not just the names that you hear that you spoke of, Reverend Al Sharpton, Attorney Ben Trump, NAACP. It's not just the big names that you hear and see. It's happening on a grassroots level. There are five states in the United States that have passed reparations legislation calling for commissions or task forces to look at abuses in those states. There are over 80 local jurisdictions who have done the same while we await action by the federal government, the federal U.S. government. So I wanted to just say grassroots, is there. Civil society is there. It's not just government. It's not just the African Union. It's not just CARICOM. It's ordinary people that are there that has made this moment possible, that's given the urgency for government to actually finally, step up. So I commend the government of Ghana and President Mahoney being the African Union's champion or reparations. I commend Sir Hillary Beckles to the utmost with respect to CARICOM. But let's not forget about civil society and the grassroots on the street.
Jendayi?
So let's also, if we're talking civil society and the grassroots, let's also remember and recognize Sister Esther Hosein. Now, the thing that we need to focus on as a people is the thing in the 2005 resolution, all right, that talks about the right to a remedy for those who experience gross violations. And the fifth principle is guarantees of non-repetition. Now, we need to, as a people, including our governments, everyone that is African, need to talk about what will it take, what measures do we need to have in place to ensure that this does not happen again, because then that shifts the conversation to our infrastructure, how our resources need to be restituted to us, how we need to be in control of our own resources and our own land. We have lost our names, we've lost our identity, we've lost our land, we've lost our spiritual practices. And right here in Ghana, I can witness every day the ravages of the colonialism on the psychology of the people. So when we talk about reparations, a resolution is great, and it's always good when something is in the public eye that raises the conversation and the consciousness, but it depends who is saying what to who, for what reason, and to what effect. Because a lot of people are talking about African reparatory justice without defining it and thinking about it only applies to them in their own land, whether it be the state, it only applies to them in their own land, whether it be the Caribbean, and not realizing the effect on the continent itself, who is still weakened, it's still colonized, it's still in psychological as well as economic bondage. In terms of repair, it would be good for President Mahama to be thinking and acting on what they can do as a government and all the other African leaders to institute measures of repair irrespective of any resolution. It is important that you don't go and say to people, you done this and that, which is correct. You are responsible for this, but also there are things that we need to do on our continent, because I am yet to be fully recognized as an African. I'm just about recognized as a human being as a result of this process. But I'm not even recognized as an African. If something happens to me, Mahama is not coming to my defense. And so, there's a lot of work that we need to do in what we call self-repair. So there are internal and external aspects of the reparatory justice process. So if anything, we need to be looking at the leveraging of this resolution, because it is the gravest and it should remain the gravest, because if we're talking about guarantees of non-repetition, we don't want this to happen to anybody ever again. So it is going to remain, and hopefully should remain, the gravest crime against humanity, because that is an actual fact to this date.
Thank you, Jendayi. I have a comment to show you here. Sierra Jackson wrote, if anything, the main people who deserve reparations are African Americans and blacks in South American countries. What do you say to that, Nkechi?
I say we all were harmed. Okay, we all were harmed. And when we look at the colonial mentality, I guess you could say, in the educational systems that we all were subjected to, whether it was in on the continent of Africa, whether it was within the Caribbean, whether it's in South Latin America, whether it's in the United States, we know that we have all been miseducated to hate ourselves, to hate where we came from, to hate the color of our skin. To our languages were obliterated, our culture was snatched from us. So we all were harmed. Okay, yes. So there should be repair for us all.
But there's this argument people always make, Nkechi. They say, move on. It happened so many years ago. Move on. Start something new. Start a new life. Forget it.
I don't even want to respond to that, because that is just so disrespectful. That type of comment is just so very disrespectful. These are injuries, these are harms, these are genocides that should have been rectified centuries ago. And because they were not, that does not mean that that repair or reparations, reparatory justice should be totally closed off from us. The harm is only multiplied, because everything that's going on today, there are direct links connecting up the dots from what's happening today. Okay, all of the inequities that are happening today, there's direct connections to the enslavement era. So we will never forget. I mean, that was a phrase that came from another people. Never forget. Okay, but people are saying we should forget. Oh no.
That you should move on. Oliver, if I may, Jendayi earlier mentioned colonialism, slavery, and genocide. There is so much to I mean, all of these events are related in a way. They are interlinked. So there's so much to unpack. How do you begin to have a conversation with, let's say, America or Europe? Where do you begin? Because they'll ask you to define, okay, what? Because colonialism in a way feeds into slave trade and then genocide. It's just so much. Where do you start?
Listen, this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is not the beginning of a conversation. It's been centuries, over 400 years of this. And so there's, how do you call it? Disassociated way of behaving as if we have no framework of how to assess and understand pain. We don't understand oppression. We don't understand the harm that all of these things have cost over the years is performative. Because when it comes to the Holocaust and genocide that happened in Nazi Germany, Western countries know too well what that means and what the impact it is on different societies. In many Western countries, they have criminalized even the denial of Holocaust. So these are communities that have long history of knowing how to assess and understand pain as it happens to their communities. All they're asking for is to shift the framework and understand and extend that empathy that they're able to extend to themselves to other communities that, by dint of a different color, do not look like them. So I am very apprehensive of these kinds of comments that suggest as if, you know, we are innocent and we don't know how to have the conversation and you must teach us and lead the way. Absolutely not. What we have a responsibility to do, and perhaps this assesses the conversation around some of these comments about who is entitled to reparations. We must repair to our own ancestors. Everybody must begin and be involved in the journey of healing. And it should not center the West. It should not center Europe. As far as I'm concerned, whether they chose to participate in the vote or abstain, this is not a conversation about them. We have done justice to our ancestors by bringing this conversation to the global stage. If they're willing to go and stand with us, sure. But this is not going to wait around for anybody. And that's what, for me, it is important in this conversation. In the same frame, while we have a responsibility to continue to keep the light, to build memory, to be able to ensure that the stories that are told are accurate, to be able to push back against whitewashing, conversations that describe enslaved people as workers who arrived from Africa to Europe or to the Americas, those kind of language must continue to push back against. So the work that we need to continue to do is work that behoves on us, and we must continue to do that, whether or not other people want to walk that journey with us, which is, for me, it is the most important and critical thing in this conversation. So in the same way in which Western societies know how to assess empathy and pain and memory as far as they are concerned, there's so many places where they continue to honor persons who fell during the First World War, the Second World War. You go to the UK, they continue to wear bobby pins for all the people that are falling behind. So it is not a new concept to Western society to understand why the memory of the past is important and acknowledging the justice or injustices of the past are important, I think.
Jendayi?
Yes, very well said, my brother. I think it's not about where do we begin, because we've already begun, right? And in the UK, we have the Stop the Manganese We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign, which is a Pan-African campaign that is calling for an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. And that is a mechanism by which we can have this space of testimony, truth-telling. We can have these courageous conversations. We can initiate policy. We can make recommendations. This is a petition that has been in place on change.org since 2015. Okay, so that's what, 11 years. And so out of that same campaign has managed to persuade the government to establish an all-party parliamentary group on African reparations in the UK. That is something that, you know, is working well in some ways and not in others, because we still find that this whole conversation about reparatory justice is overlooking the grassroots people, are not taking their lead from the people who have started, the people who are campaigning, the people who are marching, the bottom-up approach that it needs, rather than state to state or institution to institution, that actually ignores and does not engage the masses in what repair looks like. So those are some of the mechanisms, and similar ones Sister Nkechi has mentioned exist in the States, in the cities of Bristol and in London, in the boroughs of Islington and Lambeth. There are atonement and reparations motions that have been passed in 2020 and 2021, all speaking into the need for this all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. So we are talking about processes that our people need to be informed and conscientized about and participate in, so that we can take it to the powers that be and speak truth to power and demand. And so our African nations would be good to be taking the lead from us, because the African reparatory justice conversation has really centered on the Africans who were taken and the countries they were taken to, okay? Now, Africa is having a conversation which is partially Pan-African, but still not rooted in our own experience, and still not engaging the masses, and still not working with the kind of integrity that says, okay, this is what we want, but this is what we're doing with our people first, to mobilize them, to assist the repair, to move us forward. So state-to-state conversations are one thing, but it's not about, you know, as they say, nothing about us without us, and anything without us that is about us is against us.
Sure.
So we must really remember that in this whole process, and start taking our lead from the affected communities who have been knocking at this door before it became fashionable to do so.
Thank you, Jendayi. If I could come to you briefly, Nkechi, the countries that abstained from voting on the resolution, for example, you were, Nkechi, in New York for the discussions on reparations. These countries, what do you think they are most scared of? Is it reparations themselves? Is it historical responsibility? Because there's also an argument that's been made that we are not the ones. The people that took slaves are long dead or gone. It's not us. What are they running away from?
Well, I think it is all of the above, but it's also that some of them are, you know, this litigation going on right now, and they might feel that a yes vote would subject them to even further liability than they are already facing. I take a slightly different tack with respect to the extensions from my colleagues here. And the reason why I do is that I fervently feel that most of those nations would have voted no alongside the United States and Israel and Argentina, but did not, because there is a new world order I feel that is shaping, and they don't want to necessarily be, maybe I'm giving them Jendayi the benefit of the doubt, but they don't want to necessarily be associated with the current government that I live under and the current president that hits that government, you know, in the United States. They were not going to vote yes, but in any other year, decade or whatever, they probably would have been voting no. So instead of 3 no votes, it could have been very well 55 no votes, but it was not. And I think that that is telling. And I think we need to see the power that we as a people have when we stand together and vote as one. That 123 votes show the power of the global South. Okay, so those 52, 53, whatever it was, extensions. Yes, my dear sister Esther, we should call them out and et cetera, et cetera. But I just looked a little bit further as to what that vote could have been. Okay, and we need to do all that we can to hold those countries accountable.
Okay. We've got to wrap up the show, but sorry, Nkechi, I'd like to give 1 minute to Oliver. Oliver, what's going to happen next? What are you working on now?
So I think that, before the General Assembly, the president talked about how this is only the beginning. And I think that is important for us in terms of how we consider this going forward. How we design the process regarding the reparative justice frameworks that need to go, how we design frameworks around whether it's global multilateral trade rules, whether it's about the preservation of cultural artifacts, the indigenous intellectual property, whether it's in terms of return of cultural artifacts, whether it's within how we develop and teach to our own students to know how to tell our history. All of those projects have been given an oomph, I think. And I think that that's the kind of work that we are going to be involving ourselves with, engaging with different partners to develop and make sure that this is a decade where we commit to ensuring that we remain center stage. We define global relations. We define a new world order that is built on empathy and an African sense of justice, I think.
Thank you, Oliver. Before we go, I'd like to sample more of your comments. I have another comment by Ryan Stenger, who says, Africa owes Africa. It's an interesting assertion to make. And I have comment 3. This one says, yeah, some African groups participated in the slave trade. That still doesn't change the fact that Europeans created and legalized race-based chattel slavery in the US, a system where black people and their children were property for life. Thank you for your comments, and thank you Nkechi Taifa, Jendayi Serwah, and Olivia Baka-Vomawo. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next episode of the Africanews Debates.
Ronald, may I have the contact for Jendayi, like an email for her? I want to be